Hey, thanks for tuning in today. Before we get to the review and demo, we gotta choose the winner of the Fender Lead giveaway. Who's gonna win here? And the winner is Anthony! Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. That's right, it's time to start documenting the brand new 2020 Epiphone collection. We're starting things off here with the Epiphone SG Classic in the worn finish and P90 pickups. So, just in case you missed my NAMM videos, Epiphone has been revamped in 2020, similar to what was done to Gibson last year. They've introduced a modern and an original collection, but the biggest thing that they've changed is the headstock design of these guitars. They went back to a more traditional vintage Kalamazoo Epiphone styled headstock. It's not exactly the same as the Gibson open book headstock design, but it just has this really cool flavor to it. But this one falls within the Modern Collection, and as far as the SG goes in that lineup, it is the entry-level point. These are starting at $379, then your next step up is at $429 with the SG Muse, and then the highest end is the Modern Figured at $549. So all of them are relatively affordable, but what makes this one special? Well, first off, this thing is channeling a late 60s SG special, except for you have a bridge and tailpiece instead of a wraparound, because it has that large batwing styled pickguard with the P90 pickups, which is not a combination that you see too often. Gibson once offered something very similar to this called the SG Classic, but that was kind of like an early 2000s thing, and to the best of my knowledge, it is not currently in production, so this might be kind of hinting to what might come next year from Gibson. But the two big specs that you need to know about this is the finish. It's in the title, Epiphone SG Classic Worn. Worn refers to the finish. It's like a thin satin finish. They call it open-pore because you can actually feel the wood grain on these guys. Now, it's not obnoxious on the body or anything, but, you know, if you're really trying to feel these little wood pore lines, you do. And this is how they save a little bit of money on the guitar, because these finishes are a little bit cheaper to produce. And there's some pros and cons to this. The first pro is it's nice and slick. You're not gonna ever stick to this neck. It's gonna be fast. There's a lot of high-end Fenders out there that they do with a satin finish neck despite being a high-end instrument, just because many players prefer that. One downside to that though is this finish will wear off rather quickly in comparison to a full gloss. So if you go for a Muse or a Figured Modern, they're gonna have that full gloss finish that's gonna last you longer. And the second biggest spec are the pickups. These things have P90 pickups, and all the other ones within the Modern collection have humbuckers. Now, there's not necessarily one's better than the other, it comes down to personal preference. I really like P90 pickups, and the fact that this just happens to be the most affordable one is just icing on the cake to me. P90s characteristically just sound like fat single coils because, well, that's kind of what they are. But these will have some sort of 60 cycle hum because of that. If you go up to a humbucker, you're not going to get that hum when you're not playing it. And if you are interested in purchasing one of these, you can choose between two finishes. You get this one, the Worn Cherry. It's kind of a classic vintage look, despite being in the modern segment of the lineup. Or there's a really cool Worn Inverness Green, which would have been the one I would have personally chose, but somebody purchased this through my new Guitar Day program and sponsored this review. But now let's grab some of my first impressions. This guitar is so beautiful. Do you guys see this figuring on here? It's such a beautiful sight to see, especially on an instrument at this price point. Under 400 bucks, get you a guitar that looks like this. That's some decent looking figuring here. We'll talk a little bit more about that on the bench, but I love this candy cane neck. I guess that's the best way to describe it. It has these swirls on it. It's just beautiful. So that's the first thing that made me fall in love with this guitar and made me want to review it before it was even published in an unboxing episode. And I'm really digging this satin finish. I mean, sure, it's cheaper, easier to produce, but I just kind of prefer it on a player, not so much a collectible instrument. And it feels like a pretty good quality. I mean, there's nothing that I look at this and see, that's inferior, that's inferior. It just feels like a good guitar. It's a little bit lighter than most SGs, but it's not too lightweight either. But that kind of dives into our last point. The aesthetics are here. I'm really digging this new headstock. It's certainly a welcome new addition to these guys. And the SG body, it doesn't look too bad for a guitar at this price point. As far as some negative first impressions though, there's some considerable fret buzz that I'm hoping we'll be able to dial out of this thing. But the 5th fret, it almost seems like there's going to be a high fret somewhere. So that's kind of unacceptable on a brand new guitar in my opinion. So let's go ahead, throw it on the workbench, take an individual look at its parts and specs before we get to a playing demo. Inside the Epiphone SG Classic, let's take a look here. So we've got the P90 pickups like we were discussing earlier with the large bat wing style pickguard, so it has a very late 60s vibe to it. But my goodness, looking in here makes me really happy because look at the quality of that neck joint right there. You can't even see the seam between the body and the neck itself. And this is really tight. I mean, this is literally better than most of the Gibson's work that I've seen. And I hate to have to say that, but some of those Gibson SG joints, they look a little bit sloppy, especially in comparison to this. So that is beautiful. But take a look at these full-sized routes. And I say full-sized because, hey, say you don't like these P90 pickups after a while. A humbucker will indeed fit within the stock routes. All you would have to do is get yourself a new pickguard. You might be able to get away with just cutting your existing one, but I'm betting there'd be some empty spaces. So that's pretty good to know. It looks like it's marked with an M, and then you also have a QR code right here that they probably use in the factory. But now let's take a look on the back side of this. The pickups themselves, they also impressed me. So these things are called the Epiphone P90 Pro pickups. And essentially, the only marks they have on them tell you don't throw them away. And then P90S, BB, and C. But let's compare this to a Gibson P90 pickup here. You see you've got the brass base plate, whereas these are some sort of silver color type thing. But pay special attention to the lead wire coming out of here. It's braided. It's not quite the same high quality as the Gibson braiding, but I love that they're using this braided wire style. Because usually I expect Epiphone pickups to have some sort of cheap wiring like this knockoff pickup import thing had. But this is actually looking really quality. It's definitely left a lasting impression, and this is just the bottom end of the modern SG range. As far as pickup readings go, the neck pickup reads 7.69 k ohms, moving to the bridge 7.87, so a little bit hotter, and within the middle about half as much, 389. Another feature I really like about this Epiphone as compared to the Gibson version is they actually have the pickguard cut to the post size, so you can actually remove this without removing the posts themselves. That's one thing I don't like about the Gibson variations. But this utilizes what they call the Locktone ABR1 bridge made by Epiphone. They call it the Locktone because if you look in here, you see that little ridge right there? It kind of locks itself to the post. Like once you get it on here, it doesn't just easily come off. You gotta really kind of yank on it and leverage against something to get it off. So that's meant to give you better tone because it's a more secure fit. And they probably designed it that way just in case there's manufacturing variances, everything will still fit, would be my guess. But the bridge itself has some pretty good weight to it, and it is metric in style, so you can adjust it with a flathead screwdriver. And the bridge is also nickel in hardware. It's got a decent weight to it. It's not like a super heavy thing, but it's also branded Epiphone back here and has a similar lock tone feature. You can see the tongs right there. Sometimes these things can be really tough to take off. But moving on along the body, it's that worn finish like we were talking about before, but it's got this beautiful wood grain to it. So it's a mahogany body, but I believe the subspecies is usually called sapele. And it just kind of has that flamed figuring to it, which I think looks awesome, despite being a lesser quality mahogany. But moving on here, you just have a 3-way toggle switch like normal. And you got the reflector top hats here with black and silver toppers. Something that kind of annoys me is I think they've kind of put these on wrong. So 10 is usually ending right there, whereas 10 is ending there. So I'm going to go ahead and swap those because that's my own personal preference. And you've got the output jack on the front like you would traditionally have. There we go. OCD cured in about 1 minute. So that pretty well covers the body. Let's go ahead and move on to the neck. So this has a slim tapered 60s neck profile that's also mahogany with an Indian laurel fretboard. I don't have a lot of experience with this wood, but it's kind of like a rosewood substitute. It has a very similar color, but look at all the open grain on this thing. You can definitely feel it if you rub your nail here. You can hear it too. Will it really affect the way that you play the instrument? Probably not, but it's something to know. It's just a super porous wood. And as far as frets are going, we have 22 medium jumbo frets, so they're going to be easy to do bends on. Now, most of these import style Epiphones, they're going to make your fingers black a little bit while you play. Some people have hypothesized it's the strings, some people say it's a dirty fretboard, but in my opinion, it's actually the frets. The frets are what turns your fingers black. That's my experience anyway, so I went ahead and polished these guys up. They were actually pretty good from the factory, but just that little extra polishing job and conditioning the fretboard definitely transformed transform this look a little bit. But you're going to notice that we actually have binding along here on the lowest end Epiphone Modern guitar, which I thought that was very impressive. It definitely makes this guitar look like that late 60s SG Special. And as far as the inlays go, just simple dots. The nut is a Graphtec nut. I went ahead and put some graphite in it anyways. I think it's actually supposed to be a self-lubricating nut though. So nut width 1.68 inches, and that increases to 2.05 by the 12th. The first fret neck depth of 0.81. And it gets a little bit beefier here at 0.86, so nothing too crazy. Again, it is advertised as a 60 slim tapered neck profile, so it's definitely not huge by any means. Moving on to the face of the guitar, you have a classic truss rod cover. It utilizes 3 screws because they couldn't do that 2-screw variation even if they wanted to, because there's a hole right there. But that utilizes an Allen key to adjust, and I think I'm going to have to put a little bit more relief in this neck, and that might cure that high fret or whatever's going on that we talked about earlier. But as far as the face of the headstock goes, I really am digging this new headstock, but it is that flat satin finish, and the logo is slightly pearlescent, but it's not like crazy. It'll just kind of look like a white decal most of the time. But if you really go to town polishing this, you could turn that into a gloss finish. As far as the fretboard radius, it's the standard 12 inches, and quite curiously, they have them spec'd out at a 24.72 inch scale, which is just slightly shorter than the Gibson scale. And as the final word on the fret buzzy issue, I think this one's going to have to go back or get some type of warranty repair on it, because I tried adding a little bit more relief to the neck just to see if that would help us clear the high fret. I tried raising the action just a hair. None of that was satisfactory to me, so it appears that we have a couple of high frets here. I even tried hammering them all back into place because sometimes a fret does pop out a little bit. But I've exhausted all the options except for the level recrown job, so unfortunately this one's not going to pass my inspection, but everything else is looking really beautiful on this. There's just a few small QC things I saw, like the red stain goes onto the binding a little bit right there when it shouldn't. The knob orientation, as I'd previously fixed. You can see slightly sloppy woodwork right there, but I think that's passable in my opinion. And the finish is a little bit uneven where the neck meets the body. You see how it kind of turns white? There's a small staining error right here on the side. You can see some scratching, scuffing lines where they're kind of making the SG body shape. I mean, it's an open pore finish. You can't really hide that. I'm just doing this, so you guys know what to expect. Yes, it's nitpicking, but it also gives them a QC thing to look at. But I don't really see any of those small finish issues reason enough to return one of these. But let's go ahead and move on to the backside here. A beautifully figured back as well. That just blows my mind how you can have such a beautiful guitar at this price point. But inside the back control cavity, it does look like we have hand-wired pots. I'm kind of surprised not to see some sort of quick connect system on here, so that's a nice little plus. The pots themselves are made in Korea. Well, at least that one is anyways. All the other ones just say Alpha 500K on them. But as far as the route job itself, yeah, that's pretty clean. I don't see any splintering or anything, so nice job there. Okay, I'll take that back. It looks like they had a small sliver come off right there, but they just kind of sanded it semi-wet smooth. And they do have shielding on the back plate. But the strap buttons are the large style, and they have a felt washer underneath them to help secure them to place. And then there's one located on the heel of the instrument. The neck is also made of the same mahogany, but look, it actually has a little bit of a heel cap right there. So that's where they grafted an additional piece of wood onto the neck there to complete the heel. And then the headstock has a scarf joint right there. So this is also a completely separate piece of wood. Once you start playing this in and it turns slightly glossy, that's going to feel real nice. But back here, we have tuners that say Epiphone Deluxe. That's kind of cool to see. I'm used to seeing them say Gibson Deluxe. But here's our serial number. I would guess the first 2 digits are the year. So this is a 2019 made for the 2020 lineup. So cool stuff here. Great new headstock, a few QC issues, and yeah, something happened with the frets on this one. So most of the frets they actually have pretty good here, but it's just kind of this middle register on the 3rd fret when you start to get some rocking. Especially that one. So this one just needs a little bit of fine tuning to become a fine playing instrument. Uh-oh. It weighs 6 pounds, 6.6 ounces. It's relatively lightweight. I'm guessing it's going to be neck heavy, but we'll have to check that in a minute. But let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this thing sounds. Do I need to say anything else? Holy cow, this guitar is amazing. And no, this was not sponsored by Epiphone. I'm not forced to say any of this stuff. I had a great time playing this. There's a lot of things that kind of factor into why this is a great player's instrument. Making this review really reminds me of the 2019 Gibson SG Special. I had a great time with that one too. It's because it also had P90 pickups. It had a slightly different pickguard on it though, and it was a blue color. But I had great fun with this thing, and I think a lot of it comes down to that thin finish. I'm not scared to beat the crap out of this guitar because it doesn't show scratches as badly. Yeah, sure, it'll get large dents and dings and it'll wear off quicker, but on a player's instrument, I think that's what you want, isn't it? So while yes, it is technically a cheaper thing, I'm definitely loving this guitar because of that. The pickups themselves, I was impressed. I was kind of expecting there to be something lacking, but in the room I was convinced, but once I heard it back in the recordings, that's when you realize, okay, there is still something to having a Gibson P90. These didn't quite have the clarity to them, but they weren't bad. I don't think I would use this in a professional recording setup, but just for at home recording amateur ditties, I think you're gonna be just fine. But the clean tones were fantastic. I'm also really loving this side headstock profile view while you're playing it. It kind of looks like a Gibson in peripheral vision because the headstock's just a little bit closer to that. So ultimately, would I recommend one of these? Yes, definitely. This is a great bang for the buck. I mean, I am very impressed with this. If this is what Epiphone is going to turn out, I'm okay with that. But we're going to have to work on these frets. That's the only critical flaw to this guitar. So I think a small little level recrown job, maybe even just on a few frets, would do wonders on this guitar. But I'm not going to let that negatively taint this review. I mean, this one, yes, it does need a little bit more work, so definitely be careful of the ones you buy. So check one of these things out. I think you might like it because I heavily did. So that's the end of this review, but let's go ahead and check it out under Blacklight before we go. So here we are, not a bunch of glowing, but the the pickguard's kind of cool though. I like the way that that's looking. But as far as the back of the instrument, nothing too crazy going on here. This is just because somebody would call me out if I didn't do the Blacklight test, even if it's a brand new guitar. Take a look at those cool tuner tips, and it looks like the headstock does glow a little bit. And here you can see the inlays, those are glowing pretty nicely. And you got some cool side binding on this fretboard. So, very cool guitar. Thumbnail material? I don't know about that. If you purchase one of these from an online dealer, this is what it's gonna come packed in. It's just a nice little cardboard box. It's nothing super fancy. You could technically use it as a case just to store it at home because they're actually pretty nice. So they give you a little bit of bubble wrap right here. Honestly, most of the bubbles have already been popped. There's no cushioning in them at all. But it has a nice little cradled neck rest. They have a little stopper there to keep the headstock from shaking. And then this is another insert underneath there to secure the guitar. So it's good enough for storage and for shipping. And you also get a large Epiphone sticker, the owner's manual, a nice little poster if you want to hang it up there, as well as the Allen key that you need to adjust the truss rod with. And the guitar comes wrapped in this cheesecloth. Thank you, Troglodytes, for tuning into this review of the brand new 2020 Epiphone SG Classic. Definitely like, comment, and subscribe because I'm gonna be pretty much reviewing the entire new Epiphone range, minus just a few of them, because I think these are definitely worthy, and if they're gonna be like this, I think I'm gonna be happy, minus the frets. All right, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow. Take care.